final survey. Welcome to Convocation today. I'm very excited to introduce our guest for today. Dr. Cynthia Kimball Davis is from Southern Utah University, where she is the director of K-12 programs and is also an assistant professor there. I met Dr. Davis through a common acquaintance, Lisa Laird, who works here on Snow College in our Career Center. And right from the start, I was struck by what a warm person she is, and just very kind and giving. She was so willing to come and talk with us today about the topic of genetic testing and genetic counseling. I want to just tell you a little bit more about her. She is a breast cancer and brain tumor survivor, and she has radiation-induced heart disease. Since 2008, she has presented nationwide on finding previvors, saving lives, and impacting family trees. Her family cancer story has been featured in People magazine, on CNN, in the book Pretty is What Changes, and on Lifetime Access Health. Please welcome Dr. Davis to the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Cheryl. Can you all hear me? Okay. In the spring of 1994, I know some of you weren't even born then. I was living in Okinawa, Japan. Does anyone know where Okinawa is? Anyone been to Japan? It's a cool place. It's an island south of mainland Japan. It's also known as the Hawaii of Japan, and I was teaching English there. At the time, I was a military wife. I loved Okinawa. I loved the people. They were so kind and respectful, and I also loved Japanese food. My life was great. One day, though, I found a lump in my left breast. I eventually was seen by a military doctor who said it's probably not cancer. He referred me to another doctor who said the same thing, and then I saw a breast surgeon who also said it's probably not cancer. So I thought, especially, being 30 years old, it's probably not cancer. The only time I had ever heard of breast cancer up until this point was of my paternal grandmother, Geraldine Kimball, who had died of it. I apparently met her as a baby. I also remember hearing the chemo was what actually killed her. So I got scheduled for a biopsy at the Naval Hospital, but I didn't think too much of my lump after that. The day of the biopsy finally came. When they told me I had cancer, I remember just crying uncontrollably. Here I am, healthy, active, running, walking, eating sushi. I was like, me? And then they scheduled another surgery later that week to see if I had more cancer, if it had spread, and it had. Didn't this happen to older people and other people? So I had to call my parents in the States. They lived in North Carolina. Okinawa is 14 hours ahead of time there. All I know is I woke them up. My dad answered. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Cindy, is everything okay? I still couldn't talk, but began crying. Finally, I blurted out, I have breast cancer. My dad dropped the phone. My mom picked it up and said, what's going on? I began hyperventilating. I have breast cancer. Oh my gosh, she said. Being a military family, I was eventually medevaced off Okinawa to mainland Japan, to Hawaii, to California, to Arizona, to Texas, several stops in those latter 3 states. Ohio, and then finally to North Carolina at Fort Bragg Army Post. The trip took about 2 weeks, but I met the most wonderful people. Everyone on the medevac flight had some medical something going on. We shared our prognoses. Some of us stayed overnight at military hospitals along the way. It was one of the most spiritual experiences with people of all faiths looking out for each other and praying for one another. My name is Cynthia Kimball Davis. Dr. Cheryl told you a little bit about me. I also have been speaking nationwide about hereditary breast and ovarian cancers, also known as HBOC, since 2008. Just so that you know, there's a table outside that has a lot of information about genetic testing if you want to learn more about it. It's from Myriad Genetics. I also serve on the board of the Rural Health Association of Utah. Is anyone here as a student, one of their students? No? Okay, well, that's all right. Thank you for being here, all of you. And we will have a genetic counselor on Zooming in or WebExing in to answer any medical questions at the end. So I grew up in Syracuse, New York, the second oldest of 5 girls. My mom said I was ready and raring to come into this world, almost being delivered in a hospital elevator. Sometimes my mom liked to dress us alike. Excuse me, here I am with my sisters and my mom's grandmother, our gran-gran. But my talk this morning is Find a Previvor, Save a Life, Impact a Family Tree. Raise your hand if you know what a Previvor is. Does anyone know what a Previvor is? A Previvor is someone who tests positive for a mutation but does not have cancer. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So I have 3 main points, is know your family history, take action, and with your knowledge, educate and serve. Do we have any cancer survivors here? Raise your hand if you're a cancer survivor. No one? This is the first audience no cancer survivors. Well, let's give a round of applause for cancer survivors anyhow. So back to my story. I got to North Carolina, was treated with chemo and left chest radiation, and was on the way to be cured. The military eventually moved us stateside to Washington State, and I was enrolled in the University of Washington's Young High-Risk Breast Cancer Clinic and Gilda Radner's Familial Ovarian Cancer Study. Gilda Radner was a comedian who passed away from ovarian cancer. I tested positive through a Myriad genetic blood test for BRCA1. I also, that gene makes one at high risk for developing breast and ovarian cancer. This is also the same mutation that actress Angelina Jolie has. My world was turned upside down, and sometimes it was overwhelming. After all, it pretty much revolved around the word cancer. Fast forward a few years, and this is my family here. My sister Christy, also in her 30s, found a lump, is diagnosed with breast cancer, and tests positive for BRCA1. A few years after that, my older sister Wendy also finds a lump and is diagnosed with breast cancer in her 30s and BRCA1. She said 1 sister is horrible, 2 is devastating, and also finds, and 3 is like, what the hell is going on? Raise your hand if you've ever heard of the Brady Bunch. Oh, okay, all right, good. Anyone want to sing the theme song? Anyone? I've had some people sing the whole thing before. Anyone want to take a stab at it? Here's a story. Okay, this is my family right here. So my sister Jennifer is the far left. My mom, my sister Tammy, my sister Wendy, Christy, me, my dad, and Alice, because we had an extra spot. So if you're familiar with the Brady Bunch, we had to put her in there. So CNN did a piece on my story. I'm not going to show this video, but if you have access to this PowerPoint, you can watch it later. It's a shortened version. We'll watch one of the 3 videos I have here. So the first thing is know your family history. It's super important. This is my grandma Geraldine. I met her again when I was a baby, but I don't remember. So we found out our legacy is from the paternal side, not the maternal side. And it's interesting because I speak around the country and still medical professionals think that hereditary breast and ovarian cancer only comes from the mom's side. Well, ours comes from the dad's side. Here's my dad, Don Kimball, and his mom had breast cancer. She likely had the mutation. And then his grandmother died of ovarian cancer, so they say in our family, and then great-grandmother of breast cancer. But that was so long ago, and oftentimes they didn't even talk about that kind of stuff. So we started doing some digging in our family history, and this is what we found. So Dad is the carrier. We thought for sure it was my mom, thinking back then, even myself, that breast cancer, ovarian cancer comes from maternal side of the family. But she tested it, and by default, it was my dad. So we inherited BRCA1 from my dad. He felt horrible, but really, what could he do? But if you look here, these are all of my sisters, and then my mom and dad over here. So we have the 3 oldest are survivors. We got breast cancer in our 30s. The 2 are previvors. You want to be a previvor instead of a survivor. If you're a previvor, you know you have the mutation, and you can find out through a blood test, or I think it's a swish, is it a mouthwash, something like that. So you want to find out you're a previvor and not a survivor. You don't want to get cancer, so you want to stop it ahead of time. So my baby sisters are their previvors, but they do have the mutation, which means they're at high risk for breast and ovarian cancer. And if you look over there, my mom was negative. She thought she was going to be positive. She's negative. My dad is the carrier. So 6 of us just in my family. Highly unusual. Typically, the offspring in a family, 50% will get the mutation. But in our case, all 5 of us got it. So I want to show you, this is, back in the day, my positive BRCA1 myriad analysis, where I found out I have the mutation. But today it's really cool. They have these really detailed reports, recommendations of preventive care options and what other cancers you might be at risk for, etc. It's kind of a booklet. It's really neat. So here's a snapshot of what we found in our cancer family history. 6 generations, 17 BRCA1 mutation that we know of, and 12 cancers. My dad was one of 8 siblings. 4 tested positive and 4 negative. Now we say 4 positive. My Aunt Judy, before we knew all this, passed away from breast cancer. So we assumed, like my grandmother Geraldine, that they were both positive. My dad had a first cousin who died of breast cancer. So what you want to do is test at the top of the tree and all around your family to find out who has these cancers. So, and if you are found to have them, then you want your children to be tested as well. So this is a family history questionnaire. The questionnaires are out on the table. Many doctors' offices are using these today. The cool thing about them is they ask about cancers on the maternal side and the paternal side, and they ask the ages. And this tool right here, some offices I've gone around the country did a pilot program, and they would use it, and they're like, oh my gosh, we have patients like you. And I'm like, yeah, you do. But if you don't ask their family history, their cancer family history, you won't identify them. Because they see them, they see people like myself and my sisters. We walk into their office every day. But again, if they don't know our cancer family history, they're not going to be able to identify us. So this is a really cool tool. So grab one on the table on your way out and take it to your doctor. But you want to test the family. This is Tammy, my second youngest sister. She's one of the previvors. Her daughter, Ann Christian, and her son are in the middle. Marshall in the middle is negative, and Christian went to an OBGYN, her OBGYN in Charleston, South Carolina, and said, I have this Las Vegas lights, red flag, family history. I need to be tested. She was 21. He said, you're too young and you don't need to worry about it. So she went to another OBGYN and tested, and she was found to have BRCA1. And she's married now, has 2 boys, and will have preventive surgeries when she turns 30 about when they found out I had breast cancer. So family history changes. So every time I go to the doctor, I need to say, hey, I've got these 5 first cousins who tested positive, or if somebody got cancer, letting them know. So on that family questionnaire that asks about cancer family history, you're going to be constantly updating that because, again, family history changes. So take action, step number 2. This is Eric Weiner. So yeah, if you find out you have a mutation and or cancer, take action. This is Eric Weiner. He's been our family oncologist for almost 30 years. My sister Christy did her nursing rotation with him at Duke University and even babysat his children. When I flew home from Okinawa, he met with me and my family on his day off as the head of breast oncology at Duke. He was at Duke for a long time, then he went up to Dana-Farber Cancer Center at Harvard, and now I think he's at Yale. Talk about a heart-based hope oncologist. He created my chemo and radiation treatment plan. And oh, don't you love my hair? This is how it grew in after chemo. Anybody ever hear of Shirley Temple? She was a child actress, singer, dancer. So my hair was like literally ringlets. And people would come up to me and say, where did you get your hair done? And I'd say, I don't think you want to get your hair done the same place I got mine. So, but it was really, really curly. And here's a few pictures of when I was going through treatment. This is my Elvira wig I got for free from insurance. Wasn't a hit, but it was free, and I wore it sometimes just to have fun. I lived in the Caring House near Duke University. It was comparable to the Ronald McDonald House, but only for adults. My second wig was Velcroed into a cool hat my mom found. I'm here with my friend Phil. He had brain cancer, but unfortunately later succumbed to the disease. My sisters and I all chose to have preventive double mastectomies. Now, when people find out they have breast cancer or they find out they're positive for a mutation, they can be, watched closely by their doctor and do testing. I think they can take chemo, and then they can do preventive surgeries, is like what we did. Some people think they're drastic, but we all chose to have double mastectomies. And oophorectomy. So all of our female parts were taken off because for breast cancer, it's 90% effective in preventing cancer just to be safe. And for ovarian, it cuts that risk by 75%. So we had no more female parts, but we compared our works of art since we all had plastic surgery done. So according to People magazine, fear, pain, hair loss, and ruptured relationships. I went through 2 divorces. I had 2 folks cheat on me, one all over the world, took off his wedding ring, and he also said to me, what are you going to do with that, pointing to my left breast? This is before my double mastectomy, and I said, this? And he said, yes. He said, plastic surgery, and I said, so at that point I realized that in his eyes, I was deformed. So it's probably good we're not together because I don't know if he would have been able to handle the double mastectomy, although I was rebuilt. So I don't know. Who knows? But Christy, my sister Christy in the middle here, she, once she found out she had breast cancer, her fiance locked her out of the house and shipped her stuff to my parents' address. So sometimes things happen, you get these kinds of things, and not always good things happen, but in the end, it was actually good. So as a family, we were scattered geographically, but we drew closer, and we spoke more often than ever and buoyed our spirits by staying proactive, immersing ourselves in the latest research, and exchanging articles and new therapies and surgeries. I found out 10 years ago I have radiation-induced heart disease. Sometimes it's for a period of about 10 years. I can't remember the exact dates, but there were a lot of women who had left chest radiation, had radiation-induced heart disease. I kept going into emergency rooms, and they're like, there's nothing wrong with your heart. I finally went to Barbara Streisand Women's Heart Clinic at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. I was in a study, and they diagnosed me with radiation-induced heart disease. So I take 3 heart medicines every day, and I take a nitro patch I put on if I get angina attacks. And then in 2016, unrelated to my breast cancer and BRCA1 mutation, I had just a PET scan, routine PET scan done at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. And my oncologist who just retired, Dr. John Ward, called me and said, hey, your scan's clean except something lit up on your brain. We think it's a meningioma. If you're to have a brain tumor, this is the best one to have. And I'm like, cool. So I went down and saw a neurologist at Cedars-Sinai, and he said, again, you have the best tumor and it's in the best location. So we got it out, and after 5 years of brain MRIs, I'm brain tumor free. So this is my sister Tammy, and just a little piece about, she talks about being a Previvor. So we're going to watch this here.
I am a Previvor, and I am honored and humbled to be one. And just to clarify, a Previvor is one who has a predisposition to cancer but has not had cancer. I have the BRCA1 mutation, and I share this with 4 of my sisters. We inherited this mutation from our father. My 3 sisters, older sisters, are survivors. They were all diagnosed with breast cancer in their 30s. My younger sister and I are Previvors.
Hello? And so Chad Hymas had an accident happen to him. He speaks about safety. Meg Johnson fell off a cliff. She just talks about enduring and being positive. Gaylyn Condi, sister committed suicide. Her platform is suicide prevention. So if something horrible happens to you, find a platform and ask, what can I learn from this and what can I do with it? So educate and serve. So one of the things that we did is we started a Kimball Family Foundation. We did it for about 15 years. We're also super busy right now, but we educated about hereditary breast and ovarian cancers nationwide, and we provided funding for those that were testing or needed funding for surgeries. People Magazine approached our family because they wanted to highlight a family that had a paternal legacy. So get the word out through national magazines, things like that. And then Jessica Queller wrote a book called Pretty is What Changes. She wrote for Gossip Girl and some others. And she said reading this story about our family in People Magazine helped her make the decision to test. I think she lost her mom to ovarian cancer. You can educate on Capitol Hill. They wanted to know our story. They wanted to know more about these types of familial cancers. You can educate with doctors. So when I speak nationwide, I might do a breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and we have doctors talk about HBOC, and then they patients as well, and it's super fun. This is Dr. Jonathan Herman, a good friend of mine from Long Island. He's an oncologist there. Educate during clinic visits. Sometimes some of the best clinics, they've actually closed their doors, and during lunch, we've actually had education during those times, and they've been super fun. You can, this is Lifetime Access Health, filming, and tell your story to save lives through the media. And if you have that, again, access to this, you can watch that video. It's about 20 minutes. You can, just like today, provide nationwide community presentations. Just a plug-in for the Utah Rural Health Association Annual Conference at Utah Tech University coming up at the end of the month. We'd love to see you there. You can become a board member and serve on a health organization. This was at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. The guy with the guitar is Matt Pond. He's a friend of mine. He just wrote a book. He had brain tumor, 3-time brain tumor survivor. And they had patients serving on this committee to review cancer literature to make sure it was okay for patients to understand. He had to learn to read and write all over again. You can conduct patient education workshops. This is one in St. George, and tell them to keep going and to have hope, things like that. So my 3 key points are know your family history, take action, and with your knowledge, educate and serve. And again, remember, when something horrible happens to you, find a platform and do something with it. Ask yourself what you can learn from it, and again, what good you can do. Again, educate and serve. And doing so may be able to help stop cancer in a family. At least that's what we're on a mission to do. And I challenge you to do the same. Thank you so much. I think we also have our genetic counselor. If you have any medical questions, she's going to be on WebEx. Is that right? So if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer, but she's also going to be here if you have any medical related questions. Any questions for me? Yes, Carly. I think, if you go to a doctor's office, they may not recommend the test. And Rachel, if you want to speak up to any of this, I think you can pay to have the test done. Is that right, Rachel? You can pay to have it done. But if you go to your doctor, they're going to want to see that family history questionnaire. And if it looks like red flags all over the place, I think if you have like Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, male breast cancer under the age of 50, some red flags that they're likely going to test you. But I think you could also pay to have the test done on your own. Is that right, Rachel? Okay. Awesome. So this is Rachel from Myriad Genetics, and so on the table out there, there's a little card of red flags for HBOC, and she said you can, if you can't get a test with your doctor, you could actually pay for it on your own, right? Okay. Yeah, go for it. Another question?
Okay. So, do we know of other genes that show a disposition towards other sorts of cancer, or do we just know of the BRAC for breast cancer?
Yes, that's a great question. So the question is, are there other mutations that can identify other cancers? And yes, there is. So I may actually save that question for the genetic counselor, and they can talk about. So with the BRCA1, I have a link to melanoma. I have a link to pancreatic. So I have a link to cancer. So it's good to know that if you test positive for a mutation, whether it's for pancreatic or colon or whatever, the feedback that they give you, at least at Myriad Genetics, is a booklet, and it tells you what other cancers your mutation is related to. But let's bring that up also for the genetic counselor, okay? Hi, Ginny.
Hi.
So we just had a question. This is Ginny from Myriad Genetics. She's a genetic counselor. We had a question about, was the question, I think it was, how can you find out, are there other than BRCA1 and 2, are there other mutations people can know about?
Yes. So I guess at this point, I guess the question I think is going from like the cancer and the gene. So beyond BRCA1 and BRCA2, if there's like a family history of any type of cancer that's diagnosed at kind of earlier ages. Like, so for example, colon cancers in the family that are diagnosed before the age of 50, we think about something called Lynch syndrome, which is actually the most common hereditary cancer syndrome. It's in about 1 in 273 people. So it's actually, in our world, in genetics, seems pretty common, even though it's still not that many people. But that one of the big red flags for Lynch syndrome really is colon cancers in multiple generations in the family diagnosed under the age of 50. There are lots of other types of cancers that we think about as being hereditary. At this point, we test for about 48 different genes that are associated with cancer. But it's also important to keep in mind that most cancers are not caused by the mutations that we're born with.
Excellent. Thanks, Ginny. Any other questions for the genetic counselor or myself?
So you talk about knowing your like genetic makeup and family history, but I'm adopted and I don't know my birth parents or my birth family. So what would you suggest, like what genetic tests or stuff like that, so that I can be prepared in the future for that genetic stuff?
Ginny, I'm going to let you answer that one. I'm sure you've come in contact with those that have been adopted. Great question. Thank you.
So I guess the question is like, should people who are adopted consider genetic testing?
Yeah, and how do you find out? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that is actually a great question, and kind of like a gap in our service in terms of genetic testing, not just for people who are adopted, but for people who have no idea what their family history is. Families, like especially in multiple generations back, are very, very quiet about what's going on. They're individuals that are coming from different countries. That really is kind of a limitation in how we design, or how, I guess, different communities have determined who should and who should not get genetic testing. When I think about the most common hereditary cancer syndromes, for example, BRCA1 and BRCA2, like we were talking about today, that's present in about 1 in 400 people. So again, like general population, the likelihood is going to be kind of low, but still that 1 in 400 is something that I know that like the CDC Public Health Genomics Group is slowly kind of pushing on this idea of universal screening and testing for BRCA1 and 2 in the general population. Like I mentioned before, Lynch syndrome in about 1 in 273. That's another condition in which we're looking at doing things like universal screening. It's happening at this point in terms at like institution level. So a couple of years ago, I know like the entire city of I think it was Huntsville, Alabama, was offered like universal genetic screening for certain types of conditions such as BRCA1 and BRCA2. Individuals like eligible in the state of California, I think we've done the same thing. But for people who are adopted, it would be a reasonable thing to have a conversation about their providers to have this type of testing, but also recognizing that there might be an associated out-of-pocket cost. There are direct-to-consumer options such as things like 23andMe and Ancestry, and it's really important to know that that's not the same as this testing. Like those tests are not designed to look for things like this.
Does that help? Awesome. Thanks, Ginny. Any other questions? Anyone have a lot of cancer in their family right now? Does everybody know somebody that has cancer? And how many people have cancer in their family? So quite a few of you. What types of cancers are in your family? And do you have multiple breast cancers? Do you have prostate cancer? Do you have pancreatic cancer? Do you have colon cancer? What types of cancers are in your family where you have maybe multiple folks?
So in my family, we have multiple types of kidney cancer and breast cancer and brain
I can't
tumors.
really hear you, hon.
Okay. So in my family, we have like multiple types of kidney cancer, liver cancer, breast cancer, brain tumors. It's a lot.
Wow. So liver cancer, kidney cancer, brain tumors. Did you say also breast cancer? Is that on the same side of the family? Okay. So Jenny, what do you have to say for something like that?
That's a good question because it's really hard to kind of put all of those things together, especially with brain cancers. Very few of brain cancers are really caused by hereditary cancer syndromes. And with kidney cancers, it could be lots of different types of things, but we don't really, I guess, and the next questions would be like how old are these people when they were diagnosed? Seeing how many other relatives that are out there that don't have cancer, I think is something that's also helpful as well. And that would give us a better idea of the likelihood of someone or of these being explained by something that we're born with.
Thank you, Jenny. So that questionnaire that I showed earlier where it shows the maternal side and the paternal side, and you put the ages of the cancer. So in my case, my sister Christy and Wendy and myself, 3 breast cancers under the age of 50, red flag. If somebody has male breast cancer in their family, red flag. If you're of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, red flag. Because 1 in 40 tend to get the BRCA mutations. So you want to fill out that family history questionnaire and know the ages. And sometimes people don't like to talk about that, but you take that family history questionnaire. It's kind of like doing family history, and you find out from folks in your family the ages. Really crucial to find the ages. Anyone else that has a lot of cancer in their family? Anyone have familial cancers? Anyone where they have the HBOC mutation? It must be lunch, almost time for lunch. Yes.
That mutation, but they're all different cancers. So not one of them had the same cancer as one another. So I don't know what it is. I just know that like runs in the family.
So there was an aunt and uncle who had 6 kids and 5 died of cancer?
Yes.
But they were different types of cancer?
Yeah, they weren't the same type of cancer. It was a mutation. I just can't remember what it's called.
Yeah.
And then their kids also have the mutation. There's only one son whose kids didn't get it, but that's because they did a specific thing to ensure that they didn't get that cancer or that mutation.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Jenny, anything you want to say about that? Or
I didn't really hear that history. I just have like 5 relatives that are diagnosed with different types of cancers, but then I also heard something maybe about genetic testing. Is that right?
Yeah, she said there was a mutation identified, but she doesn't know what it was. But there were 6 kids. Did you say 5 of them died?
Yeah, 5 of them died. There was only one who didn't get the mutation.
Interesting. So I guess the question is trying to figure out if there are people that are still living that have access to that test result and see who and who hasn't in the family been tested. Because if you're going up, and I know Cindy had it on her slides, if you're going through the family tree, if there's like a person in between you and the person that we know is positive that's negative that you kind of have to go through to get to you, then we know we're not concerned about that mutation for you. But at the same time, if you have like lapses in like information, or if people aren't too sure, it could be reasonable to just kind of meet with a genetic counselor just to see like what those cancers look like, if there is any type of role for genetic testing. But the question is like, at this point, who hasn't had testing? Are we concerned about you, given the fact that like, so like maybe one of the relatives has had the relative that connects you to that person no longer has or does not have that mutation. That makes sense.
Any other questions? I just have one question I was going to ask Ginny, but I wanted to ask if anyone else has any other questions.
I don't have a question. I do have a comment, though. Yeah. I'm living with this kind of, not with cancer, but I'm living with this issue right now because I have, I've done some screenings lately, And, I thought everything was fine because my parents never talked about any kind of cancers in our family. And I thought, oh, good, I'm low risk, it's great. And then I was just mentioning something to my mother, and she said, oh, yeah, I tested positive for this, but it was okay because we got it taken care of. And I'm thinking, why didn't you tell me? And then she said, oh, and by the way, your aunt, remember your aunt so-and-so? She died of this kind of cancer. And I'm thinking, okay, I could have used that information when I talked with my doctor. And so I'm just telling you guys, it's really, really important right now to get that information. I wish I'd gone armed with that information to visit my doctor so that we could get things taken care of right away. But now I have to go back and explain and everything. So take advantage of those forms that are out there on the table.
That's a great point, Dr. Cheryl, because remember when I was in Japan, I'd only known of my paternal grandmother had died of breast cancer. But I was like, that doesn't happen to me. That happens to older people. So I wasn't immune to breast cancer, and I didn't know we had it in our family. But when we started looking, it's everywhere, all over our family. My first cousin, Sean, he's a retired police officer in Syracuse, New York, canine police officer. 5 girls, they have the mutation, and one of them has breast cancer. But because she knew the mutation was in the family, she was able to get treated right away. So it's everywhere in families. Once a mutation is identified, there are also folks that are negative. And that's still an answer. But knowledge is power. Now that we have the mutation all throughout our Kimball family, and there were 8 kids, my grandma Geraldine, 8 children, lots of cousins. It's all over the place. But once you identify the mutation in your family, you can do something about it. And that's what we did. So again, if you have something, whether it's like suicide or cancer or whatever, and because I'll be honest with you, at first it was like, oh my gosh, why me? But then it was like, wait, why not me? Let me do something with this. And remember, again, what can I learn from this and what can I do with it? What's your platform? So if something horrible's happened to you, come up with a platform and serve and educate others. Ginny, anything that you'd like to say, any final words coming from a genetic counselor to our students here?
Yeah, I actually think this is great timing because we're about to roll into a time where we're spending a lot more time with our families. So I guess one thing that I just encourage everybody to do is use this time maybe to bring up things like ask more questions about your family history. Try to get more specifics about ages of diagnosis. I know talking about colons probably isn't the most fun thing to do at the dinner table, but this is sometimes the way to get that information. So again, you can do what's best for both yourself as well as your family.
Excellent. Pass that turkey. What did you say you were doing with your colon? Right. So Rachel, did you want to say anything? You're okay? Okay. All right. Well, that's all I have. If anyone has any questions and wants to ask afterwards, if you want to send me an email, Cynthia Kimball Davis at suu.edu. Send me your email. I know it's private, and another thing is a lot of people don't like to talk about it. And some people, when they find out they're positive, they don't want to do anything about it. So everybody reacts differently. My older sister, Wendy, and my younger sister, Jennifer, don't want to talk about it. My sister Tammy, Christy, myself, we want to educate everybody about it to save lives. So we have to respect everyone's feelings about it. But if you want to reach out and you have any questions afterwards or later, go ahead and email me. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Dr. Cheryl.